Good morning. I promised you that I would give you a session on the Christ admission process. Um, there are two things there. One is the written test. The pattern for the written test has already been put up in the group. I think you know the pattern. Um, all that you require to do for this is to prepare from the material that we have given you from the time that you joined. That is the old pattern of CLAT. Go through all the portions in that except the legal awareness part, and you should be prepared for the test. The GK section itself consists of two things, and one is called general knowledge, the other one is called current affairs. So you can understand that one is static and the other one is with regard to what has happened over the last 4 months, 5 months, maybe a year. All these are available in the IMS site, my IMS. You can go to the links and prepare on the basis of that. That is as far as the test is concerned, right? Now, all the people who write the test have to mandatorily go through an interview. The time for that would be given later. They said it would start from 15th. And there are some of you who are taking the test later this month. Now, for those who are taking the test on 14th, I am collecting the names. I would give you times, and we would connect through Skype, and I would try to give you a one-to-one interview, and I would try to see how you respond to my questions, and I would try to correct you if it is required. That time would be informed to you a little later, maybe in a couple of days. With regard to the interview process, now please understand, last time it was the first time that Christ was conducting the interviews for such a lot of applicants, and this time also it could be the case. Last time it was a personal interview. People were sitting face to face, and there was no lockdown at that point of time, and the process by which the interviews were conducted were rather haphazard last time. Normally, till last year, your admission to Christ was guaranteed provided you had done decently in the written test and are able to communicate fairly well in English. Your admissions were confirmed. For last year, I think that has changed a bit only because of the number of applications that they have received has really gone up. So what they have done is that they have done this interview on a kind of a manner whereby they had different panels, and each of these panels were very different. Some of them were very good, and they were very professional, and some of them were not at all professional in their approach. So let's forget about it. This time you're going to get a Skype interview or an online interview, which makes me think that it is rather would be a professional interview. Now, if that is the case, how do I prepare for that? Actually, what you need to understand is when you talk into the screen on the interview, talk as if you talk normally to a friend whom you are actually Skyping with. Well, when you speak on the interview, please remember that even though I want you to be natural, please understand it is also a formal occasion. So there should be a kind of formality involved in the answering, but it doesn't mean that you adopt a completely different tone when you answer. Let me give you an example for that. You know, I would have given this interview face to face if things were a little more conducive. I would have sat you across my desk, and when you come in, I would have started talking to you normally, and I would have asked you how are you preparing, what are your other options, etc. And then somewhere down the line, 5 or 6 minutes later, I would say, all right, let's start. And the moment I say it, I can actually see the person sitting up straight, and the facial expression of the person changes, and the tone with which they answer the questions would be entirely different from the tone that they would have used in communicating with me earlier. So you need to understand that you need to be absolutely normal. Talk as if you're being talked to. Of course, by a teacher or an elder, but talk as if you would normally talk. Do not adopt a artificial tone or an artificial expression. That is lesson number 1. Be normal. It takes a lot of preparation to do that. You have to sit in front of a mirror, ask yourself an imaginary question and answer the question and see your facial expressions. It should be perfectly normal. That is number 1. And number 2, what are the questions for which you should be prepared for? Obviously, the first question is going to be introduction. Now, introduce yourself. Tell me something about yourself. Start by introducing yourself, talk about your name, talk about the school from which you come, and talk a little bit about the family background, and then try to talk about the extracurriculars, the activities. Please remember, when you have to include these extracurriculars and activities in the introduction part, they have to be rather serious. It cannot be simply that I like watching movies, etc. at the time of introduction. It should be more like I play basketball at the school level, I was a house captain, like I was a school pupil leader and an excellent student, I'm the class topper, I've been the class topper for the last few years, etc. Or you can talk about I represented the school in inter-school competition, district level, state level, and you can also talk about I have taken part in a lot of model UN competitions. I really like communicating with people. I do a lot of preparation when I go for these kind of events, etc. can be mentioned. So something that you are quite sure about answering if there are questions based on that. That should be part of your introduction. What did I tell you? Introduce yourself, talk about your background, talk about everything else, but at the same time, talk about something which you think is something special, something which is your strength. You need to think about something anyway, right? All of us have different strengths. So think about that. An introduction should be impressive. Remember, the first 2 or 3 minutes of an interview will determine how well you do in that interview on 2 counts. One is the kind of impression you make on the other person. Remember, the initial impressions are always the best impressions. And second is that your confidence level will start growing if you're able to answer questions rather well. Therefore, prepare thoroughly as far as the introduction is concerned. Each of you would have a unique introduction, of course, so I cannot give you too many examples over there, but think about a proper introduction, write it down, do not memorize it. It should not look as if you're reciting something from memory. It should look as if you are genuinely talking, and you should know what you're going to talk. That's why I ask you to write it down, but you should know and present it in a way that it actually comes from your mind and not from your memory. Please remember that, right? Second, why do you want to do law? Think about something very positive there. It could be an inspiration that somebody gave you. It could be simply that don't talk about I talk really well, therefore I want to be a lawyer. May not be a good thing. It can also be a good thing if you can combine it with other things. If you can say that, I've been inspired by many television serials, I've been inspired by Suits, that's fine. You also say that, I'm pretty good at communicating. I am quite aware of what's happening around me, and I have a logical mind. Those kind of stuff can be there. My father is a lawyer, I want to follow his footsteps, is also fine. So what I want you to say is something which is genuine, which comes from within your mind. So remember that why do you want to do a law, and why do you want to take up law as a profession is extremely important over there. If it was a BBA interview that you are attending, then of course, why do you want to do a BBA would assume a completely different type. There you talk about business, there you would talk about wanting to become an entrepreneur, they would talk about I want to do an MBA later on, and if you're asked questions that for an MBA you can do any degree, why particularly BBA, you talk about the fact that I have done my commerce group in my 12th standard, so this is only a logical extension, etc. And you say I want to do an MBA later on. So whatever, my family is in business, I want to get in with my family business. All these kind of things can be talked about when you talk about why do you want to do either law in the case of law students, or in the case of BBA students, why do you want to pursue a BBA. So have that answer over there. So these two are the most important questions that you should have an answer to. Of course, there would be questions on your subject, remember. especially since you have done, most of you would have done your courses on commerce, etc. There is likely to be a lot of basic questions on that. Science, there could be some very basic questions on science if you have done science. If you have done science in your schooling, then you should be additionally be prepared to answer the question as to, you have done science so far, why do you want to shift and move to a completely different field? And think about any answer. Think about the fact that, like, it's not a very good answer, but there are some people who would answer that I didn't want to take science, my parents were the ones and I never say, and therefore I had to join. And may not be a very good answer there. Please remember that. It will be better if you talk about the fact that, like, I was not exposed to the other fields other than science during my school period till 10th standard, and it is only after I took science that I understood that the world doesn't simply consist of doctors and engineers, and that there are several other rewarding and interesting professions, and that is how I want to switch over to a new profession. And things like that are a better answer than saying that my parents forced me to get into science. But remember, since most of you have done commerce group, there would be subject questions based on that. So be prepared for those kind of questions as well. Of course, there will be questions based on GK, there will be questions based on current affairs, there will be things like, do you think that this lockdown is really effective and should this lockdown be lifted, or what do you think the changes would be when it is lifted? You remember that I gave you one class, it's been a week ago, and I have not been giving you general awareness classes after that. I would try to do something tomorrow, but if there are questions, I've given the class earlier where I said life would be completely different, teaching would be different, because many of you are exposed to online education, so the world may switch over to that. One particular field is that the Supreme Court yesterday has asked the high courts, and in turn the high courts have asked the district courts to respond as to whether they can have this kind of a system on a regular basis, instead of people coming over to the Supreme Court and physically be present in the court. They said that we can actually hear the arguments online and we can give decisions based on that, and that would be easier, would save a lot of money, save a lot of time, and it's a good idea. So that is one. So be prepared for questions on current affairs. So what did I tell you? The questions that you should be prepared to answer: one, have a very good introduction, an introduction which will highlight your strength. Please remember, the moment you highlight your strength, the next questions are likely to be based on what you said, right? If you say I play football, expect questions on football, especially if the interviewer is well versed in the field of football, whether it is on EPL, whether it is on the Indian Football League, etc., ISL, etc. You should be able to answer questions based on that. So remember that the strength that you bring into the introduction, the strength part that you bring into the introduction can lead to further questions. That's why I said, do not say anything that you cannot defend later. No, if you read as a hobby, please say that. But if you have only read 2 books in the last 2 years, please do not mention reading as a hobby. But you should be prepared to defend that. There would be questions like, lawyers generally have to read a lot, you do not have a reading habit, how do you want to make up? And you say that, like, I do keep in touch with things around us, I can speak on that. But in that case, expect questions. All this is assuming that you get a professional interview. Now, if you don't, there is nothing you can do except answer the questions that is asked of you. I expect this time that the interviews are likely to be professional because it is online. I don't know whether it will be a one-to-one interview, which could be the case, or is it going to be a set of standard questions that you have to answer, in the sense that when you start the interview, the first question will come onto the screen. I do not know. There are places which give interviews like that. We would only know as we go by, in which case there will be something on your screen. Question number 1, introduce yourself, in which case you would start talking. Now what happens is, this will be recorded and somebody will be looking at it later. Or it could be that somebody is sitting opposite to you and they would be asking you the questions. You can see them in the corner of your screen and they would ask you questions based on that. You would be seeing them on the screen and yourself on the corner of the screen, and you would be answering questions. So be prepared. Good introduction is rule number 1. Number 2, why do I want to do law or BBA or whatever it is that I want to do? That is question number 2. You should be thoroughly prepared for that. Then subject questions, then questions on things which happen around you, etc. Remember, most of the questions will lead from the previous question, right? They might ask you questions on your strengths and weaknesses, etc. Weakness is unlikely, but if they ask you what are your strengths, be prepared to answer that. If they ask you for a weakness, be very careful, don't say things like I'm not punctual, etc., and I'm not very hardworking, etc. Things like, I tend to be too much of a perfectionist, I expect everybody to do as well as I do, and things like that are better answers than anything else. But all of you don't give that answer. Think about something that you can actually come across as something which is not too negative, but at the same time is not a positive aspect as well. So think about it. Once I give you the individual interviews, I would try to clarify things to you individually. That will be in the coming days. So please remember, prepare for the interview. The best way to prepare for the interview, if you have never attended interviews before, is to sit in front of a mirror, imaginary questions, and answer the questions, or ask your parents to sit in front of you and ask you questions and answer the questions. You do it 5 times, you do it 6 times, you should be prepared for the interview, right? There would be a certain amount of nervousness that all people face before interviews, and that's quite normal. But please remember, that nervousness is something that you can overcome. It all depends on how you start that interview. The first 5 minutes of the interview, assuming the interview is about 10-15 minutes, the first 3 minutes, 4 minutes of the interview, if it's a short interview, is going to determine how confident you are and how well you come across to the other person. So continue doing this, and I would help you individually. For people who have their interviews later, that is people who are taking the test on 26th, I will do it at a later stage. I'll concentrate on people who are taking it on 14th, and I will give you time. Let me get a full list and I will allocate time to you, and at that time you can come on. You need to install Skype on your laptops and or your tablets or phones. Are not very comfortable to use, but if you can get access to a laptop, I'm very sure that all of you have, and install Skype in there. I would give you my Skype username, and you can contact me at a predetermined time. So come in time and I will be able to help you with things. All right, thank you very much. Do well. God bless. Stay safe. Thank you.